I think so. I think I can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Now there's no.
Now I can hear you. Now
Excellent.
the sound is working. Thank you.
Right. Just remove the headset.
Complicated.
Okay, so I guess there goes my introduction. I did my introduction just before I invited you in, and probably nothing came out, and I was just sort of lip sync, and that's it. Everybody is probably guessing. Anyway, I just said thank you very much for joining me. This is a special episode of T Junction because this is my first IGTV live in English. I've done some IGTVs before. They were all in Arabic. And I was just saying a very special guest today indeed, Ryan. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll just do a small introduction of you, and then I'll give you the mic, and then we can kickstart this session. Sam, thank you for joining. Sam is an NLP and hypnotist as well. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of interesting input from him as well for this episode. Ryan Montis is a board-designated trainer of NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. For those of you watching who are not familiar with the term, we're going to be talking about that, obviously. And he's a hypnosis trainer. I'm quoting what he had actually sent me. He runs experiential training courses that gives people the tools to make rapid and lasting change in self and others. And Ryan lives just outside of Toronto, Canada. To dig out, and one more thing I was able to dig out actually was that you are an ex-soldier and you are an ex-private detective. Now, this is very interesting.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. I want to hear more on that and what actually brought you to the world of NLP. So over to you, Ryan.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Talal, for that lovely introduction. And very honored to be speaking with you today. Thank you for having me on as your first English language guest. That's such a treat. So I appreciate it. So a little bit more about me, in addition to what you just heard. Yeah, I started out as a private investigator a number of years ago. When I was in my early 20s, I became a private investigator here in Canada. And I specialized back then in corporate fraud. So I was on the road conducting corporate fraud investigations predominantly. But I was a field agent or a field investigator. So a lot of time actually on stakeouts, doing covert surveillance, watching people, watching premises, using hidden surveillance equipment, all these kinds of exciting things, And I had a good time, and it was short, but it was a good career. I did it for a number of years, but it wasn't my permanent thing. Eventually the novelty wore off. I was looking for more excitement, and I gravitated towards the military here in Canada. So I did about 5 years with the Canadian Army. I was never deployed during that time. I didn't go into combat or anything like that. So most of my time was spent in Canada doing training and doing other tasks related to military life and preparedness. And then after I left the military, I decided it was time to start a business. I was ready to move away from the world of employment, and public service, so to speak, and move to entrepreneurship and building my own business. And for many years, I had studied neurolinguistic programming and hypnotherapy and hypnosis and the unconscious mind from my own personal development standpoint and interest. When I was still a detective and I'd be on stakeouts for 10, 12, 15 hours a day, I would listen to audiobooks. I was always listening to audiobooks, because my eyes were occupied with whatever task I was doing. But I was generally alone in surveillance vehicles, so I could listen to, music or whatever I wanted. I chose to listen to audiobooks. And I learned all about the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind, empowering beliefs, disempowering beliefs, where we learn, what we learn, patterns of behavior, all this stuff. And through that awareness and through tools like NLP and hypnotherapy, I was able to really radically change my life. I was able to get over many of the fears and unconscious programmings that were holding me back from, what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. I used to have problems, for example, with shyness and social anxiety and things like that. And I was able to totally overcome those things. And as people can observe now, I'm quite comfortable speaking, to somebody all the way in Dubai with, who knows how many people are going to see this live and see replays, probably in the hundreds, I'm sure. and it's no problem. And that's very much thanks to these tools that now, I've made my business. So after I left the military, I decided, okay, I was leaning towards getting into law. I was studying law in college. I went as an adult student and returned to college to study law. And then as a personal development tool, again, I decided, I've studied NLP and hypnotherapy for so many years, informally, reading the books, listening to the audio programs, taking online courses. I thought, let me go take some formal training just as a personal development tool and see how it is. And the course was actually quite life-changing for me. Even though I was aware of all the patterns, I was aware of the power previously, going through and doing it with a real expert, a real master trainer, and working with the other students in the class, I was able to release so many other limiting beliefs. And, I had some trauma in my background. I was able to release all the negative emotions surrounding that. And it was totally liberating in terms of new behavioral freedom. And I decided, you know what, these tools are so powerful and so empowering. I need to bring them to the world. I need to get them out there. This is going to be, one of my businesses moving forward. And right now it is the business for me. And it's just been phenomenal since then.
Excellent. How many years have you been doing this now?
So studying NLP and hypnotherapy, it's been about 15 years, and using it for self, it's been about 15 years. But I went through and did all my formal training to become a board designated instructor only in 2019. So my company was less than 2 years old, but 2020 has been a phenomenal year where I've shifted my focus less so from one-to-one work and working with clients, and more so to running trainings to create new practitioners so people can go out and use these tools to empower their clients. So 2020 has been phenomenal. I've run a bunch of courses live in person prior to the pandemic, and since then I've run a bunch of courses via Zoom, and it's been a lot of fun and seeing massive results for the students and the people that they go out and serve.
Excellent. Yes, I mean, I've seen obviously your Insta account. I've watched some of your videos. Very interesting. And I invite everybody who's watching actually to check out Ryan Montis's account on Instagram and any other accounts. He'll tell us about all of these later on, so you can actually follow him. We've got AMS with us, who has just joined. Rudaina, that's my wife. Thank you for joining, my dear. She's always my support in these lives. And Sam is still here, obviously. Sam, by the way, is from Toronto as well, so he's from your hometown.
Oh, very good.
Okay. Anyway. Well, yeah, you've been studying NLP. That's much longer than I have. I've just graduated this year, back in March 2020. So I'm very new to this, and I'm sure I'm going to be learning a lot from you and your valuable sort of input and insights in this live. Okay, so is there any speciality within NLP or any area of interest that you're actually sort of more interested in than any other, or are you or do you look after certain clients as audiences, maybe more specialized with teens and kids? Some coaches, they go into that area, or maybe an area of interest that appeals to you. Is it more hypnotherapy or is it more NLP?
Very good question. When I started training, I thought that I was going to be very much an NLP primary modality type of person, just NLP patterns and techniques and communication. And as my understanding of NLP and related modalities and submodalities and hypnotherapy has evolved, I've actually definitely come to favor the traditional hypnosis and traditional hypnotherapy side of the spectrum. I find, at least with the clients and students who are attracted to me, there's a certain sort of joy and fun attached to hypnotherapy, and is this feeling, although it's very much rooted in science and an academic background, it very much feels magical. NLP does as well, but hypnosis has this certain flair to it that people just can't resist. They love being a part of it. So my focus now in my trainings and practice is with hypnosis and hypnotherapy as the foundation. And then I bring in elements of NLP and another study called timeline therapy when appropriate, to give people, the results that they most need, and to get them there in the most efficient manner possible. But, sort of my favorite thing is running one session of hypnosis and having somebody totally knock out whatever their challenge was, or if they're, aligning their beliefs with a certain goal. If you can get it done in one session, 30 to 60 minutes, that's the feeling that I'm chasing. Sometimes it takes longer. Obviously, I know you know that. But I love that power of a good hypnotherapy session. A person can come in and within the session have noticeable shifts in mindset, so that they know they can move in the direction they want to move.
Yeah, it's very interesting you said that, because I mean, this is something common. I've been speaking to coaches, and this is something common that I've heard about hypnosis vis-a-vis or versus NLP. They like it because I think they say it gives like quicker results, or it's faster than NLP. It's sometimes it's joyful for the coaches themselves who actually do both. Whereas on the other hand, I've spoken to coaches, they feel more sort of comfortable, if you like, with NLP, and they like these sort of pre-framings and the linguistic approach to to the issues with the client. But I think you're quite right. It's the joy, it's the quick way of doing it. Although I'm sure it might be a bit more advanced in your part of the world. Over here, hypnosis is still seen as, oh my God, you're going to hypnotize me. So I'm not going to be aware, I'm not going to be conscious, and we're like, no. This is more like trance. It's not hypnosis. It's more like trance. It's not what you see on TV, like from the 1930s. The black and white movies. But yeah, it's very interesting you said that. So you see all types of clients, right? Women, men, kids, adults, grown-ups, elderly.
When it comes to in terms of a niche for clients, I'm very much still a generalist. I haven't niched down into a particular thing, like some people specialize in smoking cessation, or some people specialize in weight loss, because my main focus is the training. And the students that come to me, they're really the ones who are niching down into different demographics or different problems that they're tackling. So for me, my niche is people who want to learn hypnotherapy, NLP, and these unconscious mind tools, so that they can go out and first transform their own lives, but then go out and serve others. I don't work with children personally. That's the only thing I don't work with. Anybody who's under 18. And it's just because that's just not a market that I've gotten into, and I don't really have a lot of personal history dealing directly with children, so it's adults. But other than that, yeah, I'm very much a generalist. I just want to touch on one thing before we get too far away from it. I don't want to give people the wrong idea that NLP is slow versus hypnotherapy. Certainly with NLP, you can have transformational change within one session as well. It's just that, in my experience, I really enjoy those sessions, particularly with hypno, where we can, have these transformations in one session. Totally still possible with NLP patterns, as I know like if you think about the like script or something, like a 20-minute thing, and like makes instant and permanent, right? But yeah,
I'm more. I mean, I think until now, maybe because I'm still new compared to you, obviously, but I feel I'm more comfortable with NLP versus hypnosis at this stage. Whereas I know Sam, for example, who's with us on the line, he's more into hypnosis, and he just loves hypnosis, and he prefers going into that sort of area directly with clients. But as you said, I think both of them, they give you I think the outcomes and the results that you are looking for. So anyway, thank you for that again introduction, and I'd like to say welcome to everybody who's joining us. The room's getting now more crowded, which is good. Heal body, harmonize mind. Thank you for joining. Narjis, thank you for joining. Sharbil, the legacy coaching joined as well. Adil, my dad, is online. So the whole family is joining now. So thank you everybody again, and let's get into our topic for this week, which was expectations. To me, this is a very, very interesting topic. I mean, I've put some posts out there, I've put some stories on the topic. It's very interesting because you find different points of view. It's somehow controversial to a certain extent, I feel. But let's kick it off with, from your perspective, how do you define expectations? I mean, we hear the words anticipation, for example, assumptions. Some people say it's hope. But is it really all of that sort of combined together, or is it depend how do you actually look at it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the fascinating thing with the word expectation is it's one of those words that very much, the meaning is unique to the individual. So I could have a personal definition of expectation, and I'll explain what my personal definition is. But I would expect that, any other person hearing that word, it could fire totally different neurology. For a lot of people, I know the word expectation carries a negative connotation. If they happen to be, to use an NLP term, if they happen to be at effect, the word expectation probably has a negative connotation. And then on the flip side, there's a lot of people who are the opposite, where the word expectation is associated closely with positive things. People who are in NLP jargon are at cause, right? So for me personally, expectation is more of a neutral word. It could be positive, it could be negative, but basically it's a belief that something is going to happen. A belief that something is going to happen. And I think there's different degrees of belief in that. Like if we think of something we're certain is going to happen, like I'm certain the sun is going to rise tomorrow. That's a very strong expectation, very strong belief connected with that. And then, I also, I believe I'm going to hit my earning projections for the year 2021. Again, very strong suspicion, but not quite as certain as the sun rising tomorrow, right? So I expect both of those things to happen, but the expectation is different contextually, right?
Yeah.
The importance of expectation that a lot of people don't realize, and I think it's an excellent theme that you've selected, expectations, is because expectations have a way often of becoming reality in and of themselves. When we have an expectation, particularly if it's connected with emotion in some way, it's almost like we're rewriting the neurology of our mind so that we're going to automatically take actions to make that expectation a reality. Or if you've heard the term self-fulfilling prophecy, when we really think something's going to happen, for better or for worse, our unconscious mind doesn't care, for good or for bad. If we really think something's going to happen, we have a way of making it happen or allowing things to align to assure that it's going to happen. So when we bring this into awareness, this concept, and realize it's not as abstract as it seems when you understand the neurology of what's going on, we can use it to our advantage versus being at effect of the whole expectation paradigm. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about that, Talal?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, looking at it, it's as I said, it's very interesting because I think you quite rightly coined it in terms of it's how we look at it, and it could be something very factual or very that we're used to, and it's a belief that we've been sort of since we were born we've been raised to, like the sun always shines, yes, unless it's doomsday and something out of the ordinary happens and we don't see it. And then there are other things where you pin your hopes or you pin your expectations on something, and even it's very interesting because even though you're sort of focused on it and you're looking forward to it and you're sort of driving in that direction, and then something happens and it doesn't happen for you. And I think this is where I said the disappointment happens sometimes, where with high expectations, and when you put all your sort of energy, and we're going to talk about that now, obviously, with the importance of focus and the importance of energy on a goal or an outcome, and then how does expectations play into that, and whether this, if your focus is right and your energy is right, as we know, and it's targeted towards that goal, then it will materialize and it will happen. But it's not, some people argue it's not always the case, and this is where they get really disappointed, and it affects them mentally, physically, emotionally, obviously, as we know. Before we move on, Sam is just asking a quick question. NLP/hypnosis are powerful tools, yet I don't see many people actually using it at work or in an office setting. What's your view on this?
My view on that is that I agree. NLP and hypnotherapy and hypnosis techniques, at least in the Western world, I don't know about elsewhere, but in North America, the acceptance and adoption of NLP and similar techniques is at an all-time high. More so than it's ever been. The taboo of hypnosis, is more diminished than it ever has been, and rightfully so, because it is a very much legitimate and real and beneficial technique and tool. But as you mentioned earlier, Talal, there's some people who hear it and they have all these bizarre ideas of stuff that they've seen in old black and white movies, and a man waving a watch, and and stage hypnosis shows give people a very specific view of one little piece of the hypnosis umbrella. So maybe, and I suspect there's a lot of people who are trained in NLP and trained in hypnotherapy, or who have read the host of self-development books that are totally founded in NLP, but don't use the jargon. There's so many of these self-development books and courses and programs out there that really are NLP, but they've been rebranded as something else. And so there's so many people out there that are NLP trained and don't realize they are. There's so many people out there that have benefited from hypnotic processes and don't even know it. And they're just casually, indiscriminately using these at work and at home and in life in general, because NLP, when you're not specifically a practitioner, when you're a client of NLP or you're somebody who's used it for self-improvement, the changes have a way of integrating at the unconscious level and influencing your behavior. So even though people want to work and running specific patterns with their coworkers and stuff, it doesn't mean they're not using NLP and the principles of hypnotherapy. And hypnotherapy on one level really is just communicating with somebody in a way that you can access conscious mind. So anybody who's ever told a really enthralling story, well, they've used hypnosis, because they've used what we in the hypnotic world would call a metaphor that allows them to access the unconscious processes of the listener by triggering their imagination. That's a form of hypnosis in itself. So I think part of the answer is people are using it, whether they realize it or not. Or there's a lot of people who are NLP trained that just don't make a fuss about it. They just use it. And why aren't more people overtly using NLP, or why aren't more corporations overtly training their people in NLP yet? And I think it's just a matter of we're not at that saturation point yet. NLP has grown exponentially every decade since the 70s, since Bandler and Grinder, brought it to the world. But still, there's a lot of people that haven't heard of it. If you drop the term NLP at a regular networking meeting, you might have 2 out of 10 people that have heard it before, right? So it's just that it hasn't totally sunk into the social consciousness yet, to the point that everybody wants to make it the standard. But we're getting there. More than ever, people are coming around to this way of thinking, and realizing that so much of our own reality is influenced by what's happening at our unconscious level. And there's different modalities, different ways of accessing that. Certainly, I think the 2 best are NLP and hypnotherapy, but there's lots of ways out there to do it. Really great question.
Yeah.
Really great. Yeah. Really great question.
Yeah. Okay, so back to expectations. So we defined it, and we talked about the neuroscience. We're gonna go more into details and have your views on that later on. But as we said, sometimes it can be an inspiration, and some people refer to it as an inspiration or a motivation, and other people refer to it as a disappointment, and hence causing pain and suffering amongst people. So how can this occur at the same time, and is it based on whether it's the self or others, and how do you see that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on there, and so let's dive into that a little bit. The first thing to consider is what I would call dissonance, where there's a mismatch between what we're consciously expecting and what unconsciously we're expecting. Okay, so particularly with the proliferation of the law of attraction, and the movie The Secret came out a number of years ago, and people really loved it, and rightfully so. It's a great movie and good information there. However, people can get themselves into this situation where they believe they're using this principle, so they're consciously focusing on a goal, consciously expecting something to happen, consciously certain that they're going to win the lottery or land the dream job or meet the perfect partner, whatever. They're consciously certain of that. But there can exist a dissonance where at the unconscious level, they actually have limiting or disempowering beliefs that are sabotaging any of those things from happening. Okay, so a person could consciously fixate on the idea of landing the dream job, for example, which is a good one, and this is a common scenario. But unconsciously, back from childhood, back from between the ages of 0 and 7, they have this unconscious belief that they're unworthy of money or they're unworthy of success, and it's outside of their awareness, but it still influences their behavior. So although they're consciously focusing on this goal, find the perfect job that pays the perfect salary, unconsciously they're sabotaging themselves by failing to notice job opportunities, or not communicating their skills well, because 95 approximately percent of our behavior throughout a day comes from our unconscious mind, where all those unknown beliefs exist. So when that dissonance happens, and the conscious mind is certain one thing's going to happen, but the unconscious mind has other plans because it's respecting the beliefs and the structure and its values, then that disappointment is very much likely to happen, and it can be devastating if a person fully invests consciously in an idea and accepts that it's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
on the flip side, again, it goes back to the person's kind of overall model of the world. And we talked about at cause versus at effect. Somebody who's at cause, which is where we want to be,
Yeah.
even when a disappointment happens, even when they did expect something and were surprised that it didn't happen, they don't see it as a failure. They don't see it as a negative. They see it simply as feedback, as additional information. They understand that the journey's not over. It's just an opportunity to course correct. It's just an opportunity to make take a different path on the same road, leading to the ultimate goal. So it's that perception, I think, is what can be debilitating or empowering for people when it comes to expectations. Is first of all, what level of awareness do they have of what's happening outside of the regular conscious day-to-day thought, and the other thing is, what is their strategy for dealing with disappointment? Because if we talk to Bill Gates, we talk to Elon Musk, we talk to Richard Branson, what we find is their strategies for dealing with disappointment are to let it roll off their back, absorb what learnings they can, and to keep going. Whereas if we talk to people on the other end of the spectrum who are constantly defeated and are not reaching their goals, their strategy for dealing with disappointment is often giving up and going back to the board and starting a whole new thing. And I think these are close.
They see themselves as the victims.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Talal?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it all boils down to that. And I think, and I believe, as we said, expectations is a very strong belief. And then we spoke now about the subconscious mind or the unconscious mind, and the programmed beliefs, if you like, habits, values, learnings, whatever we have in our unconscious mind since we were born until today. And so even if you're aware, and we always, I mean, one learning that we take, if anything, from Eckhart Tolle or from the training that we did in terms of NLP, is always being conscious and being present and be aware of the moment that you are actually in. Now, we've talked about the strength of that, and even if you are conscious, even if you are aware, and even if you're focused, as you've mentioned, on your goal, and you have this sort of very, very positive expectations, and yet it didn't happen, that means there's something in there in our unconscious that needs to be fixed, if you like, or reprogrammed before we move to the step where you actually start getting your expectations, if you like, right, or heading in the right direction, or where your focus is and where your energy is flowing. And this is what I think, tell people or tell clients who, because this is one point that they keep, for example, mentioning that, I'm so focused and I'm so determined. I keep, saying these affirmations, positive affirmations to myself day in, day out, and still nothing is happening. So I think NLP doesn't work, or I think, hypnosis doesn't work. And then it is only when they go through that breakthrough session, which we call breakthrough session, and you start taking them into that area and direction, and you ask them a few questions, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, all right, and they start nodding their heads. And slowly, when you start explaining to them the map versus the territory, map of the world, and then our unconscious versus our conscious mind, 95%, it controls everything that we have, sort of, or what we do, our behaviors, our actions, and hence our outcome or the results that we will get. And then they're like, okay, so there must be a limited belief that is preventing me from doing that. And then they say, okay, fine. So let's get rid of that limiting belief so I can get on with my life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned that process that you sort of take clients through when you start. And it always starts with education. You know, we don't just straight into any pattern, whether it's hypno or NLP or timeline therapy. We don't just jump in and start making changes at the unconscious level, because the conscious mind needs to understand first what the deal is, what's going on,
Yes.
so that it can be on board. Because we want that conscious, unconscious integration. We want, you know, both sides of the coin to be happy and to move in the direction of, you know, what the person ultimately wants. And, you know, as you mentioned, if there's something a person really wants in their life, and they've tried and they've been unable to reach it, and it's a, you know, and it's an even remotely plausible goal, then we need to immediately suspect disempowering unconscious programming. You know, if some you know, is in a normal job market where there's jobs or, you know, whatever, and all they're looking for is an extra, you know, $10,000 a year salary, and they've been trying for years, they haven't been able to do it, almost certainly it's an unconscious limiting belief. It's not the world conspiring against them. It's not bad luck. It's just that they're literally not seeing the opportunity when it arises, because part of their unconscious mind is programmed to ignore it in order to respect some value or some belief that was installed before they can even remember.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely one point of it. And the other point which you've actually tapped into is the leader versus the victim, or the cause effect, as we said. And this is such an eye opener when we start explaining that and we start going through that to clients. I mean, I've spoken to clients one-on-ones, and we've done that in corporate trainings as well. And when we ask them the question, you know, if two people are communicating, who's actually, how much percentage is the cause and effect? Like, can you give me a percentage? And they're like, okay, if the dialogue is happening, like a communication is happening between two people, so it must be cause and effect should be like 50-50, a split of 50-50 or 70-30. They never get it. It's like 100% on the people who's actually starting the conversation. He's at cause for 100%. Then when you start explaining, they're like, okay. And then when you go into this CSBR mode, which is the conditioning, you know, the state, behavior, and then result, they're like, okay. So once they start looking at it from that perspective, and they admit that they are always at cause, and if they can convince themselves that they are always at cause, then the whole thing changes, because then you're not waiting for something external to actually impact your action. You're actually creating it, and you're doing it yourself, which, you know, you quite rightly mentioned is, am I going to wait for something or expect something extraordinary or something out there to happen so that things start moving in the right direction? And it's not the case.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You're bang on. And I love that we're talking the same language here. And I think the other thing, just to add to what you've said, is when we're at cause, you know, and in my world of NLP, we say at cause versus at effect, but you know, there's different jargon depending on what NLP school you studied with, but it all means the same thing. And when we're at cause, which is where we're accepting responsibility for everything that's happening in our lives, one of the big benefits is that we start to view what we previously viewed as misfortune. We start to view it as just neutral data. It's no longer some stab in the heart. It's, you know, when somebody says no to us, or we get rejected, or you know, whatever thing previously in our past we would have been disappointed or saddened by. Now it's just information. Now it's just input to help us navigate the world that we're in. We gain this sort of little, when we shift to at effect fully, we get this little transcendence. We're a little one notch above our old reality, where we can view things in a much more empowering light, which is one of the big benefits of that conversation that you're describing when we have that with a client or a student. It's often a hard shift for people to accept, and when they do, very empowering.
Exactly. Sam is also adding a comment saying presuppositions help a lot, I found, especially in clients who hold heavy fears.
Yeah.
I think absolutely
right. NLP were life-changing for me too. That was one of the first things I studied, you know, back 15 years ago. And I remember watching, you know, like now a 30 35-year-old, VHS recording of Richard Bandler sitting on a stage, just going through all the presuppositions one at a time, this hazy video with terrible sound quality. And like, I remember watching that and like writing notes and being like, this is gold. This is the good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I enjoy watching even Milton Erickson as well.
Yeah.
Those also gray videos and old videos. I mean, he's just amazing for someone who's. I mean, I'm always interested in hypnosis, although I'm not there yet. I cannot say I'm, practicing it as yet, but I've always been interested in that. Okay. Okay. Well, so we've spoken about inspiration versus disappointment when it comes to expectations. Now, I know kids might not be your area, but I'm sure you have a good input on that, because when I was looking into that topic, I remembered something which I think happened to all of us at some stage when we were kids. Whenever we do mistakes, our parents are like, "I didn't expect that from you," right? Or "I'm disappointed in you." And I just didn't expect that from you. And I've recalled, now being the man I am, I recall and I go back to the old days. I was like, yeah, they said. Now obviously we don't blame our parents, because this is the best that they knew at the time. I mean, now that I've gone through that training, I wouldn't say that to my son or my kid, because I know how this will or might affect him negatively. But how do you think, if people who say that to their kids, "I didn't expect that from you, I'm really disappointed with you," what impact will that have on these kids in their upbringing?
The impact of expectations on any people, particularly our children, who see us as authorities, or see the adults in their life as authorities, the impact of expectation is huge, colossal, phenomenal. And if we look at some of the studies around this, I can't remember who did this study, but or was it a case study? There was a woman who was a supply teacher. I think it was in the United States a few decades ago. You probably heard this story, where she was going into a class, and they gave her what she thought was the marks of the students from the previous year, right? And they were all very low, C's, F's. And so she went into class expecting the students to do poorly. And, sure enough, they all did poorly. They all continued to have, D's and F's, right? And then they brought in a different supply teacher, and she got a different background on the kids. And she went into the course thinking that they were all A+ students. She fully expected A's and A+ and B+ from these students. And interestingly, same set of students, she got what she expected. Okay. And, it's easy for a second to think, well, how could that be? Is there some kind of like magical force? And my answer is, it sounds true to me, and it's totally reasonable, because we have a way not just of speaking our expectations of people, we have a way as human beings of telegraphing sublingually our expectations of people. When we expect somebody to behave a certain way, we communicate with that person in a certain tone of voice. We have certain nonverbal indicators. We have body language that's associated. And when we expect somebody else to behave in a different way, we have a different set of nonverbal indicators, and different tonality, and different, vernacular, and different body language. And we don't often realize, at least before being trained, before becoming aware of this, how much our expectation of other people is creating or influencing their behavior. Probably the most so with children. Okay.
With children,
Particularly where children are seeing every grown up around.
It goes in there. It goes into their pool.
It goes in. Their critical faculty, their barrier between the conscious and unconscious is not as strong as an adult's. So they're very much, open to influence. And when we talk about the language of expectation, with the great example that you gave, I'm disappointed, or blah, 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 we need to be very careful to not connect negative feelings or negative emotions to, our own perceived failures when it comes to speaking with any people, but especially children. We want our verbals and, and our nonverbals, where we want our verbal communication to communicate that we expect the best from them and for them, because then we give them the best opportunity to meet that expectation. People generally meet our expectations, whether they're good or bad. doubly so with children. If you expect them to be good,
Yes.
you congruently expect them to be good and do well, you exponentially raise the likelihood of that happening. And I say congruently because it's, you know, it's possible to hear this and say, you know, say to somebody hypothetically, I know you're going to do well, blah, 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 but not mean it. You know, maybe part of you doesn't congruently expect it. But the greatest, I think, NLP tip that you're alluding to that we can give to a parent is to congruently at the conscious and unconscious level expect your children to be little geniuses. Expect them to, you know, adapt,
Always.
evolve
Always.
well, and deal with the challenges of life well. Don't protect them, you know, from every little thing. We don't want to be helicopter parents or anything like that. We want them to live their lives, but we want to expect the best of them and for them. And really, that will get them moving in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's not only about expectations, as you mentioned, it's how we talk to them. You know, how do we, the words that we use, the sentences that we use. And I only came to that realization, thank God I had this sort of training, because I thought I was raising, I have two now, a 23-year-old and an 18-year-old, but I also have an 8-year-old. So it's that little one whom I'm very careful with. And, you know, it's always encouragement, it's always positive, you know, statements rather than don't do this or don't do that, because as we know, the unconscious does not take negatives, does not take the don't, it takes the other, right? So it's these things that actually, you know, made this whole sort of difference. And I look now at my kids and I'm so happy that I'm, you know, I sort of not raise them differently, but sort of I'm much more aware now when it comes to really talking to them and how, you know, to encourage them, so that I know that they are going, or they are taking that in positively and going in the right direction. So yeah, I think it's absolutely right. And it's interesting because this topic, as soon as I said expectations, as I said, you know, I looked back and I remembered that saying, you know, I never expect that from you. And I know many parents do that thing to their kids, you know, and they feel maybe it's from their perspective that it's something that will encourage the kid not to do that thing again, or not to, you know, to be careful at the next time, or something like that. Again, you know, no judging, no judgment.
Of course.
We don't know their map of the world. It's probably from their perspective. And because, as I said, our parents probably did not know any better back then. So, but then now we know. And this is how we are sort of dealing with our kids. Okay, to go back to strictly NLP now, and speaking from a neuroscience perspective, when we spoke about the power of that belief, or the belief of expectations, what happens in the mind? What scientifically happens in the mind? You know, when there's that expectation belief, you know, we know that neurons that fire together wire together. So if the belief is there, and then you've got this expectation, which is a new expectation, how does it sort of fit in, you know, in our unconscious mind?
Yeah. So if we have a belief in our, you know, whether it's in our conscious or unconscious mind, the more we fire that belief, the more we think about that belief, the more we, you know, put energy or emotion into that belief, the more it strengthens the neural pathways in the mind. Okay. And so any behaviors that are in our mind associated with that belief, they get strengthened too. So, you know, if we have an expectation for the future and we spend time each day thinking about it, you know, as many people do, meditate on their goals, you know, once or twice a day, which I think is an excellent idea. Every time we do that, we're strengthening the neurology and any associated neurology, you know, in the mind, literally in the brain, literally the neural pathways, right? And so the big benefit there is those bits of associated neurology. As you mentioned, what fires, what was that elegant expression you said?
Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Yeah, that's right. Neurons that fire together, wire together. That's very much true. And so when we meditate or we think or we put energy and we fire that neurology for the goal, yes, of course, we're strengthening that neurology, but now we're also firing the neurology of the behavior that's associated with it. And we're strengthening that neurology too, because at the unconscious level, when we consider a goal, something called a transderivational search occurs, where the unconscious mind is automatically evaluating all the resources and all the potential pathways and all the behaviors that will be necessary to reach that goal. So as we, strengthen the neurology of the goal, the unconscious mind is automatically strengthening the neurology of associated attitudes and behaviors that are aligned with that goal. And that's very important. And it's very important to understand that the opposite is also true. And, most people, I think, have heard the expression that what you focus on grows, or where focus goes, energy flows.
Where the mind goes, the energy flows. Yeah.
And, it might sound, that might sound abstract, or that might sound, a little bit out there to some people, but from a neuroscience perspective, it's really not. It's quite founded in science, because the more you focus on negative things or worrying or about what might happen to go wrong or bad expectations, the same phenomenon occurs. You're strengthening the neurology and associated neurologies with those images, with that imagery. So and that's where self-sabotage really comes in, because you begin to strengthen the neurology of the behaviors that are associated with that so-called failure that you're attempting to avoid.
Yeah. And even if we're just thinking about it, because as we know, the unconscious cannot differentiate between, a thought or an image that you're having, or an imagination, and an actual experience that you're actually going through.
That's right. That's right. And yes, so it's possible to create a habit in the mind, and then it becomes reality. And if you practice is a great word.
Exactly.
If you practice messing up your life over and over all day in your mind, you start to perform the behaviors to, reach that goal that you've set for your unconscious mind. But if you practice in your mind being successful and reaching your goals every day and envision it happening, that's actually going to begin to, create the habit outside in your external world as well.
Exactly. I mean, I've had a session previously, or an episode on imagination and the power of imagination, and this is something that I was talking. It's amazing. And I speak to people about it, and they're like, "Are you serious? Are you?" And then when I take them through the breakthrough session, I tell them how the unconscious works, and the power of the third eye that we've got sort of embedded in there, not just our senses, that we see that the real things with, but actually what we see in our mind actually affects, and the mind or the unconscious sees both things in the same. It cannot tell the difference or differentiate between an actual experience and something that you are actually imagining, and it's just fascinating. Okay, so I think we've got about 10 more minutes, because I know this automatically sort of shuts off. This is an amazing sort of chat, Ryan. Thank you once again for joining, and I'm sure we're going to have, like, this is the first of hopefully many to come in the future. One last question: the expectations, or the importance, the power of expectations. How important or how critical it is during the time that we are living today, or the times, that the challenging times that we're passing through today with COVID, the quarantine. People are being sort of laid off their jobs. There's fear everywhere of this sort of virus, although I call it flu. It's not a virus to me or anything. It's a disease. It's a normal flu, and this is how I look at it. But some people, obviously, as you know, are very scared. Economies tumbling, and businesses, losing money, people being laid off. How important is that, focusing in the right sort of, or managing our expectations in the right way, in order to make, I think, what we call the most out of this sort of period that we are going through right now?
Yeah, really excellent question. And expectation does come into play. And, there might be a tendency in some people to think it's a bad idea to be optimistic right now. And I don't think it's a bad idea to be optimistic right now, or ever. I think it's a good idea to be optimistic and to have an expectation that serves you. Have an expectation that serves you. Because the most important thing about expectations is that, as we've discussed in this call, they don't just get filed in your mind and disappear. They tend to turn actual behaviors, which very much so influence your ultimate reality. So yes, it's I think of my time in the military. We spent lots and lots of time, training and being ready, and um, and doing things to prepare for what you might call the worst. And it's not because we were expecting the worst. It's because we were choosing to expect to win and survive in the case that anything ever did go wrong. Okay, it's a very different paradigm. We weren't expecting, to be attacked or invaded in Canada, and I still don't expect that to happen within my lifetime for sure. But we were
Yeah.
expecting that, we were going to do everything in our power to set ourselves up for future success, whatever that means. And I think the same paradigm we can use now today in general in society. Expect to survive, expect your future to be what it is, and the important thing there is that it will influence your behaviors. And to think about, to give you a really quick example of how this can manifest with COVID, for example. If
Yeah.
collectively, as in the social consciousness, if we all accept, have an expectation that we're going to beat this and eradicate it and it's going to be gone, in a couple of months, that could manifest as people washing their hands more frequently. It could manifest them, as people respecting the guidelines given to them by their local officials. We're doing things that will, increase the chances of that expectation happening. But if we have an
Yeah.
expectation that's like, oh, we're going to be burdened with this problem and we're going to fight about it for the next 10 years, we're going to create that behavior that is aligned with that, that expectation. So right now is the time to, be realistic. Don't turn your back on, the information, and certainly, develop your research and get the facts. But be mindful of your expectations. And I think optimistic, realistic expectations are a great, great, great idea.
Absolutely, absolutely true. I think spot on there because, as we said, like it depends how you look at it, and as we spoke throughout the episode, the link between expectations, your beliefs, your perception, and versus reality as well, and how you look at things makes all the difference. Because I can look at COVID and be on the be on the effect side and just wait for it to sort of go away, or be in quarantine 24/7 and not do anything about it. Or I can say, no, you know what, why don't I make the most of this and maybe learn something new or do a certain activity that I wasn't able to do before. I've had an episode about, we were discussing COVID, and we tapped into all of these things. Are you sort of the optimist? How are you looking at this whole situation? Are you looking at it positively, or are you looking at it negatively? Are you going to be the victim, or are you going to be the leader in all of this situation? And it's all, I think, how we look at it. And you're absolutely right. I think they're all sort of interlinked, and if you're looking at it from a negative perspective, if you like, then obviously your expectations are going to be very different than if you're looking at it from the other way around.
Yeah. I fully agree. Fully agree.
Excellent. Well, I think our time is almost up. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you, Ryan. Would you like to say a last few words before we sort of close?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to thank you again, Talal, for inviting me to be on the show. It's a distinct honor. I believe this is the first time I've been interviewed by someone from Dubai, or who's living in Dubai. So
there's always a first. There's always a first.
I'm very excited about that. Again, and it's been a lot of fun. I really, really, really enjoyed this conversation. Anytime you want to chat about anything, just let me know. I'm happy to come back and have another talk.
Thank you very much. There's a last question from Sam. How would you differentiate between setting goals versus living in flow or presence?
Between setting goals and living in flow or presence? Well, we don't necessarily need to have one or the other. We can live in flow and be present and be setting goals. There's this metaphor where it's, some people have the idea that going with the flow, it's sort of like laying on your back in a river and it just takes you wherever it will. And then there's
Yeah.
the other, idea of going with the flow where it's like, yeah, you're in the river, yeah, you're going in the direction of the flow, but you're in a kayak and you can steer and you can choose which fork in the river you want to go down. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can set your goals, you can go with the flow, which means, not resisting the irresistible, you know, accept the things that you cannot change while you influence the things that you do have control over, which is a heck of a lot of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much again, Ryan. Thank you everybody for joining us, whoever is online. This is going to be on my social media, on my Instagram. I'm gonna save it right now, and it's gonna be there for whoever sort of missed. I'm gonna tag you, Ryan, so that you can also share it with your audiences and viewers. Thank you once again, and I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future.
Yes,
Thanks.
very good. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody, and thank you for joining.